Count us in, so we count ourselves in.
Bet.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to Deep Dive Dialogues, where nothing is as it appears on the surface and the conversations go deep. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with my childhood friend, Christian Pitts,
Hey.
and also a polyglot / actor / singer. Don't nobody know that. And are there any other accolades that you want to mention for yourself, Christian?
That kind of does it.
Okay. So I'm excited to talk to you today because you've known me since I was younger.
Yeah.
And I've known you since you were younger. And I think the journey of a polyglot, first of all, can you explain to people what a polyglot is?
So a polyglot is, by definition, someone that speaks multiple languages. And the general consensus in the polyglot community is 3 or more. And while that's debatable, polyglots speak many languages to a varying degree. That's all.
Okay. So how did you start your journey as a polyglot?
I would say, okay, so my first experience with any other language other than English would have been when I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade. We were hosts to 2 Japanese middle schoolers.
Okay.
And in that maybe 3 weeks that we had them, and
Your mom's a teacher, right?
yes, my mother is an educator as well as my dad, but
And dad's military.
right, but communication at its baseline is just finding ways to understand each other. With us as kids, my siblings and I had to learn that we didn't know Japanese and they didn't know English that well, but where we met was where we tried to meet.
Okay.
And over the course of those 3 weeks, that kind of planted those seeds in what I consider my need to be heard. Mm-hmm. And my need to, or my want to understand the other person.
And I can resonate with that. And I love that little anecdotal story that you told right there, because it highlights something that I love to talk about, especially as a linguist, which is pidgin languages.
Yes.
So pidgin languages and creoles are formed by 2 people who speak separate languages attempting to interact. And so when they attempt to interact initially, it forms a creole. If that creole is then passed down to another generation, then it forms, I apologize, it forms a pidgin. Mm-hmm. If the pidgin is passed down and has more speakers from the next generation, it becomes a creole.
Right.
And so I think that's amazing that you talk about how, having the foreign exchange students, it's an exchange because you're learning from them and they're also learning from you. And even though they were visiting your house, you're still learning like some of their culture, right, and understanding your own deep desire to want to communicate. So I think that's awesome. So that's the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, for me. And I mean, that's just those little seeds I really think are the most important, because that gives a potential language speaker of a different language or a foreign language that desire, maybe the motivation to maybe research or dig a little bit deeper into something they've heard before. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I would almost pose the same question to you, but do you think, before I ask like how you started, mm-hmm, do you think that those little seeds came from a person or they came from your exposure to someone?
I definitely think that those seeds came from my desire to be understood and express myself. Mm. And the reason I say that is because I know we're going to touch on this. We both attended Franklin Township Middle School in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I remember the first time that there was like a world cultures class. So they didn't have a specific language class in middle school, but we had a world cultures type class where they introduced a bunch of different languages.
Oh.
I remember saying, it would be so cool to be able to express my thoughts and ideas in as many languages as possible. And so I think that deep-seated desire came from within me,
Yeah. And,
inspired by the teachers and classes.
I probably would have, see, if I had had that class, I probably would have done this way sooner.
Sure.
But, in terms of, I guess, though, the desire to be understood, I think that also lends its hand into the both the immigrant experience and the American experience, because as both of us have many friends that are immigrants, whether first generation or second generation, the part where the immigrant experience and the American experience kind of meet in the middle is that desire to be understood. It's just there are varying levels of how much effort is put into it.
Yeah.
And I noticed that when it came to my desire for it was Portuguese first, Brazilian Portuguese, and I knew that I wanted to learn Brazilian Portuguese because I had listened to a song. And I knew that it sounded like, I don't know how else to describe it, except it sounded like a delicious soup, where it was all sorts of different words I didn't know, but they just sounded like they all mixed perfect. And so at a certain point, I was like, I don't know where to find Brazilians, but I know their flag is green and I know they sound like this. So in my head, I always would try to be on the lookout, but never actually look.
Yeah.
And with my sister, when we had those two Japanese middle schoolers, that seed was so deeply planted in my sister that my parents had found her an international school in Indianapolis.
I did not know that.
Yes. And I think for a good 5-6 months, every Saturday, as long as we did our schoolwork and everything, my parents would take her to that international school and she learned Japanese.
Well, I feel like that's a good segue because once my parents saw how deep the seed was for my desire to learn Spanish, my mom actually sought out the program through IU.
Really?
Yeah. So she was telling me, I think I've said this before. Initially, I was a little hard-headed.
Yes.
Because I was like, I'm doing so well learning this without having to actually go to the school, that I was like, I don't want to go to another country. And my mom's like, well, you need to learn how to the grammar and how to read and write properly. And so I don't know if I've ever told you this, Christian. So when I went, I've always, in the past, I wasn't a good test taker. And so I did subpar on the tests. And so there was a last part where they let you do an interview in person.
Oh.
And so the in-person interview, and I was able to articulate, all the questions were in Spanish. So I was able to articulate myself in a fashion that was above average. And I
Really?
Yeah, got in there. And so I've always thought about, just on a broader concept, on a deeper concept, how someone's presence can be a lot different than how they look on paper.
Oof.
And that was my experience in Spain. I did a lot better in the performance part than I did actually taking the grammar test. And what I noticed is that some of those experiences didn't translate until after the fact. Do you get what I mean by that?
Ooh, that's a good point.
Like when I say experiences, is I could not describe. It wasn't until I could speak the language that I could then go back and connect the dots. This part is the subjunctive. This part is the front-loaded knowledge.
Yeah.
Didn't sink in until I had the experience to couple it with.
Yes, I do agree. I figured I got my first taste of that in my Spanish learning because as you know, in the US, we're mostly taught to have our Spanish learning geared towards Spain and life in Spain. We're not geared towards Mexico, who was literally our neighbor. And in Mexicans, or the Mexican dialect, it's more common to use to describe a car as carro. But then if you talk to man,
Coche.
yes, if you go to Spain, coche. And then that just lends itself to all the other names people have for cars. But with that being said, you have having that book part first and that front loaded learning that you think is going to why I did that, I don't know. Is that just so y'all know I'm a thespian, okay? I am an actor. This is what I do. But I would say that front-loaded learning, yes, it sounds funny and it lacks context, which is why immersion is so important. But a lot of times you're not taught immersion is important until you've done a lot of book work. Was almost something I would have put after the fact if I could redo it, would be to go learn a few phrases while I'm there and then come back and kind of retrace my steps because I already have the context.
Facts. And so what do you think, being that you have a similar experience in the learning process, what do you think, Christian, about our diverse upbringing going to Franklin Township Middle School? So just to kind of like put it in perspective for the people that are watching, we go to a predominantly white high school where we're learning about other cultures still. Because I would say we had a sprinkle. I tell people all the time, we had a sprinkle of different cultures.
Yeah.
And one of the things I did love about our school is that we had World Cultures Club.
Right.
And so I would say that there were, like, when I was learning Spanish in high school, there was 101 or two Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, 2 Puerto Ricans to be exact, one from Miami and one actually from Puerto Rico, Colombian, one Dominican, or 2 Dominicans, one Dominican from New York and one Dominican from the island.
Yep.
And then we had a handful of Mexicans.
Yes.
And so what was that experience like for you just growing up in a predominantly white high school?
I think I would say at the time it was almost an afterthought because I was already at that time I was already still trying to find my identity and be proud of my identity, because at the time, for context, if being a African American or Black presenting in a predominantly white high school, many people find their way of becoming friends or finding friendship by saying that oh, well, you act white and that's why I like you. Or you don't act like the Black kids, so that's why you're great.
Well, I want to interject this because I feel like our high school is interesting in the sense that for up until a period of time, there had to be a certain level of integration. And we talk about this because in the south of Indiana, we go to a school where they force integration.
Yes.
So we had kids that were Black that were bused in from the inner city.
Ooh, yes. Yes.
And it was merely to keep the demographic at a certain ratio.
Yeah.
And so a lot of us that lived in the suburbs, a lot of time would be stereotyped as living in the inner city, or just certain stereotypes were thrown upon us because of that. But
yes,
not from a victim mentality, right? But it's just that was our reality. And so I think that the separation of saying, oh, you don't act Black, there was also a cultural divide between the Blacks that grew up in the suburb and then the Blacks that grew up in the inner city.
There was, and I think that also became a part of my, I guess, the cultural learning experience for me, which would end up lending its hand like that. It would end up lending its hand to my process of understanding people from other cultures because of what I went through. And as a Black kid that lived in the suburbs, we were primarily raised having to be grammatically correct, having this standard of, if you don't do this, they will treat you like this.
Yeah.
And you have that hammered into you. So when you go to school and find out that people talk the way that you talk at home, normally, you have a little bit of a mental clash, but then you see how that part of you doesn't necessarily go away. It's just you're finding out you understand people in a different way, but it's still understanding. It's just in a different dialect. And
so that ties us back into linguistics.
yes. Linguistically, listen. But linguistically speaking, that idea of code switching doesn't really come into play unless you actually do it actively. Because a lot of people understand code switching from an example point of view, not when they actually do it.
Exactly.
Because it's natural.
And I would say that, and I would say maybe because you're also linguistically inclined, that I am able to pick up when somebody code switches and become more self-aware of when I do it as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a little bit of an advantage because then because once you become aware, you do it with intentionality.
Yes, very much so. And I think, but as a result, tying everything back to that experience in Franklin Township, code switching became a thing for me because I knew there were words and phrases that became common in my lexicon because of my friend group. And also because of the fact that I knew that certain things sounded better to me and sounded more natural to me, but certain things didn't fit the environment that I was in.
Right. And so how do you feel about that? Because I'm still kind of processing my own sentiments on that.
Really?
Because it's like, if you change your verbiage in the way that you speak to be more quickly understood,
Yes.
are you participating in the process of dumbing yourself down?
Ooh. Okay, that guy. I thought about that in real time. I said, wait. It's like the pool just got real deep. I would say that's up to interpretation for you personally. But on my side of things, I really feel as though that is something that helps you function. And honestly, to have that skill is a flex in and of itself.
All right, speaking of flex, ¿qué tú piensas pasó? Speaking of flex, ¿qué tú piensas? ¿Cuál era el momento que tú entendiste que tú sabías español a un nivel más alto?
Déjame pensar.
¿Cuándo te diste cuenta que ya sabías español a un nivel que era más alto de lo que era normal?
Cuando, bueno, un tiempo durante mi turno en el hospital, un paciente, los pacientes me dijeron una cosita mala. Y en ese momento yo entendí, pero no me di cuenta que yo entendí. En ese momento me dijeron, mira, ninguna mujer que quiere comida quemada. And if you are not a Spanish speaker, roughly translates to no woman wants a black man. Direct translation is no woman wants burnt food. And I knew, I'm sorry, sabía que era una cosita mala, pero no sabía en qué contexto. Primero pensé, well, estaba pensando, oh, hablan, hablan sobre la comida que le sirvió o hable sobre mi piel o la gente como yo. Y cuando me di cuenta, todo el mundo se cayó. I didn't know what to think at the time, but I knew, oh, I think this is, I think I understand now because they didn't have to say la gente negra. And they didn't have to say el moreno or los morenos. They said something in context, and with the Spanish, not with a decent Spanish knowledge, and it hurt. And I had an emotional reaction to what I heard versus just listening to Spanish and just hearing Spanish. Understanding a language, everything changes. But in that moment, that was the first time where I said, okay, this might not, I was like, this, don't let this discourage you, but now you know context is key. And I never forgot that.
Context is key. And I feel like as a linguist and as a poet, sometimes like someone will say something and I take it in a million different directions.
Listen.
And then I have to remember that my grandfather often says, you can never know another man's thoughts. So it's up to that person to give you the context of what they meant.
Yes.
But when you're reading something on paper, it's going off of your own experience and how that feels to you. And so one thing I will say about hearing offensive comments in English or in Spanish, because I've had my fair share of reactions to the things that people say, is that I think Keke Palmer said that. She's like, I'm the queen of reframing. It's like, even if you know someone's intention is to offend you, you could take that any way you wanted to.
Yes.
And so hablando del el comentario,
Sí.
like you said, no one wants bird food. Aunque yo supiera que la persona quería decir otra cosa, I would take it exactly like that. Like, yeah, I don't like bird food either. Because we're going to pretend that I don't like bird food because I knew you were to talk about what I think you talk about.
Right.
But I understand that the societal, just going back to us at Franklin Township School and stuff like that, the constant sense of not being accepted.
Yes.
Even though we're supposed to be strong, powerful people and have self-acceptance, but
always,
it still doesn't feel good in situations where we're not accepted by other people. And that's,
absolutely.
And that's something that we have to learn from and deal with. And in my ideal world, everyone will be kind all the time.
Right.
But I also have to be realistic and know that I'm not kind all the time.
Listen, same, especially if you catch me on a bad day. But, you know, going from on that side of things, being a poet, do you ever feel after you have created something, because I know a lot of thought goes into that.
Right.
Do you ever have a time where you will write something and then months down the line, you see it again and you're like, no, you have to rewrite it again?
Okay, so we're talking about poetry, but I'm gonna still tie this into linguistics.
Yes.
And the mindset of switching languages.
Yes.
So I feel like the same way that when I'm in a Spanish mindset, let me pause and rewind. I never understood why my stepfather used to say before he would go to work to get into the police mentality that he needs a moment to get into the proper mindset. He's like, I meditate and I get into a moment so I can go and properly be in that mindset to do that job. Now I understand that we do choose our mindset. So if I open up that Spanish compartment of my brain, that's a mindset that I'm in.
Yes.
So if someone asks me to recall information outside of that mindset, it can be done, but it might be a little more difficult. Ooh. So in the poetry mindset, depending on which way I'm writing the poetry from, because I would say like the poetry is like a filter. So I'm in a mindset and then I put the poetry filter on and write from that mindset.
Like from a memory or just like a whole.
Well, when I say a filter, like say I'm gonna write a Spanish poem, I'm first in the Spanish mindset.
Okay.
Then the poetry comes from that Spanish mindset. And so if we think about emotions and the emotions that we channel, it's the same way. So if I'm in a happy mindset, I put the poetry filter on and then write from that mindset.
Right.
And so sometimes I'm in a logical mindset.
Mm-hmm.
They say like to put yourself into a logical mindset, you can write with your left hand. You can do, different things for the left brain and right brain to kind of be in tandem. But yeah, so I would say that to answer your initial question, not just with poetry, but like with every mindset that because I've become aware recently,
Yeah.
I choose to enter that mindset for that specific thing that I'm doing.
I guess switching between switching between languages, do you feel as though this is an interesting one. Do you feel as though there are different parts of Tamara in different languages, or do you feel as though you just have a different that the mindset is the only thing that really changes? Because for me it's a filter, and it's my humor.
Okay. So for me, I would say I feel more comfortable being romantic in Spanish. I would say I feel more comfortable telling the truth in Spanish. Cause like I'm an American, so
Yep. Right.
and I know foreigners do that too. Like if you meet a foreigner that has a different primary language, they get away with saying more stuff in English than what we would get away with.
Right.
And so I would say that for me, it's passion, it's sexiness, seductiveness, like those type of things. I feel more comfortable in Spanish. To gain that confidence to express those aspects of myself in my native language, because even though we could say that Spanish is a mindset, Spanish is what was the other word that we use? A filter. Yeah. But Spanish sometimes for me is a shield. So it's like, okay, alter ego, jump in. And it's like, I feel, a different aspect of myself walking in heels, speaking in Spanish, like I have confidence. But now that I'm maturing and just evolving more into myself, like as a person, I feel like I'm able to start to express that aspect of myself in English too.
Ooh, I never thought about it that way, but I know that with Spanish, I feel more comfortable consuming things. Like whenever I'm talking to people, I've noticed that I feel comfortable listening and conversing in Spanish. I feel more comfortable making jokes in Portuguese.
Okay.
And
so for Portuguese, I would say that, I don't know, like Spanish is dear to me. That's like one of my, like, I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
I would say for Portuguese, I definitely like the love songs.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like,
and have you noticed that the song scheme in Portuguese is different?
yes, and also the way that they navigate their rhythms and the way that their time signatures are, especially with samba music and with what's called forró. I think something that I always found interesting was that Spanish music or Spanish language music is very much to the beat, very much rhythmically speaking, versus with Brazilian music, you don't necessarily have to follow the rhythm. Your words don't necessarily have to go on the beat. They could be falling off at the end. And something I also love about Brazilian music is that one could argue you understand, like you can feel emotion in Spanish music. Absolutely. Especially bachata. But then when you hear Brazilian love songs, there is something different. I don't know what it is, but for me, when I hear a Brazilian love song, I know it's a Brazilian love song because I stop what I'm doing. I'm like, say that again. Like I melt.
Okay. So tell me, so, okay, you start learning Spanish. Look back on our timeline.
Yes.
You start learning Spanish, and you realize that you know it at a different level when you hear something that offends you. And you're like, okay, this touch my soul right here. And so at what point, because I remember, and I do commend you, Christian. I want to say like a wholehearted congratulations, because I remember when I first started, and I say this all the time, when people ask me how I got to this point in language learning, I tell people, and then, you could tell people stuff that you don't know if they'll actually go out and do it.
Listen.
And so I'm like, you went out and you did it. Like I told you like, hey, like this is the framework. You're going to find your own things during the process that work for you, but this is how you get started. And I'm like so proud of like how far you are in the journaling, and that we could sit here and have like una conversación en español y me puedes entender 100% completamente. And I remember the day that you called me like elated, excited on the phone. Like, I just had my first conversation in Spanish.
Listen, just to clarify, I still have this notebook in my closet, and it still has her notes, and it literally has the first 2 pages on it is where in her handwriting she has yo, tú, él, ella, usted, and it's still there. And every now and again, I'll pick it up and I'll see the page. And whenever I see the page, I always think, I thought this shit was I'm sorry, I don't know if you can curse here, but
Hi, and you're fine.
like, I really thought this was impossible. And every time I look at that page, I'm always just like, and look at you now. If you could tell that person one thing, what would it be? Stay away from Duolingo. Anyway, but all that to say, that really does. That's something that I really do keep as not necessarily a memento, but just something I always keep as a reminder of like, if you really want it, you can get it, but you also really have to want it and remind yourself why. Because like, y'all don't understand how excited I was when I found her Instagram page. Okay, this was a whole process, mind you.
We went to school together.
Yes, we went to school together. Okay, that's the thing. Okay, we was cool, but then sometime around like high school, I didn't see her again. Okay, and then all these years go by, and life goes by. Mind you, I'm in Texas. Okay, this was in Indianapolis last time I saw this lady. I go and I moved to Texas, and I'm just like, dang, I'm leaving Indiana behind. Everything's fine. This whole process happens, and in the midst of all of that, when I'm on Instagram, I'm just like, you know what? I want to listen to this. I want to see some of these like Spanish pages, right? And one of the people that I don't know who I was following, but I was following somebody, and then I saw her face, and I said, oh, that's cool. And I went on her page, seeing that she knew languages, and I said, she was hanging around that Dominican guy a lot, and I can't put my name.
Yeah. Jose, FYI, shout out to Jose Jimer, my best friend from high school who taught me Spanish when we were 13. I had a little crush on him back in the day.
But listen, long story short though, seeing that page and then reconnecting, that I had no idea that would lead me or start me on a journey to get me here, especially from one conversation in my kitchen. Mind you, this was somebody I was like, oh, well, she knows languages, then I might be able to do something. I might be able to pick up something.
But I just remember how hard you worked at it. And it's crazy because people would always ask me, especially when I started giving online classes and stuff, they would say, how long is it going to take me to learn? And my response would be, it depends. Because I would tell them, I'm like, I met somebody who went full throttle from the time that he started and looked for every opportunity. And look for every opportunity, and that determines the outcome. Like, how much you put in determines how much you get out, and that's with anything.
Absolutely.
And I would say that it's not just a work ethic, it's a passion level. Because when you have passion about something, you're willing to put in the work.